sheaf that we love. I've made lots of stuff in that, and this is called Golden. And welcome back to the channel. I'm going to pick up from that last clip in a previous video where I talked about a birthday gift request that I had been given, and so added to my spring 2026 project list a number of items, including this request for a wheat sheaf hat and mitt set. And the birthday person picked out this lovely Karen golden yarn. But today I'm going to talk about the fact that this is a 6-weight, very chunky yarn. And so how do you take patterns that I make very often for hats and mitts in a 4-weight and figure out how to adapt them for different yarns? So for this hat, I used a 4.5 hook. For the mitts, I used a 4. And as always, all of my notes and details and pictures and links can be found on Ravelry, and you don't need a Ravelry account to look at the projects. So this is my favorite hat to make of all time. It is a very simple, easy construction hat where you are basically chaining for the height of the hat and then doing a whatever number of rows in half double crochet, slip stitch, back loop only to create this great rib effect. And I've done many hats and shared information about them because I donate a lot of these. And the gauge on this one, with what I think is a pretty kind of common 4-weight type of yarn, was 15 stitches, 12 rows. So this is a loops and threads, what I call my play yarn. I do a lot of prototypes in this yarn, and I think it kind of represents the majority of kind of a 4-weight yarn out there. But there are huge differences in 4-weights, so I'll use another 4-weight to compare, and then include this new 6-weight bulky yarn that the birthday person wanted me to create the set out of. And when I did a gauge test on this, again in half double crochet, slip stitch, back loop only, my gauge was 10 stitches, so down from 15, and 12 rows. So how do we figure out now what I need to think about to do this hat properly? Well, I use the sort of standard chart sizes. So if you need standard sizes for anything, go to yarncouncil.com. And a medium hat, which is usually what I demo, is typically assuming someone has a 9-inch kind of height on their head to go from, you know, your kind of eyebrows up to the top of your head. And their circumference around the widest part of your head is usually 22 inches. So that's the measurement I'm going to use to compare like to like. And on the left side is a yarn that I did the very first hat video I posted on how to make this great ribbed hat. But it was a very stretchy and thinner kind of 4-weight yarn. So I'm going to call the one on the left the 4-weight slimmer yarn. And the gauge on that in the video is 20 stitches for 18 rows. And again, very stretchy in the makeup. So if I think about the, yarns or stitches, per inch, 20 stitches gives me a 5 stitch per inch. If I compare that to the gray weight that I just kind of showed you a picture of that yarn, I'm going to call that the larger or the more denser, 4-weight yarn. My gauge on that I just showed was 15 stitches and 12 rows. So that's giving me, instead of 5 stitches per inch, 3 3/4 stitches per inch. So again, I'd have to adapt because I'm going to get very different results for the same hat. Now I said a 9-inch kind of height on the hat. Well, I added 2 inches for kind of the basic brim. You can make it longer with a fatter brim, but let's say 11 inches just to compare apples to apples. So on my, kind of 20 stitch, 5 inches per stitch, I'm thinking I need, to chain a certain number to get, again, that 2-inch brim. And I'm getting a very different stitch count when I actually do the calculations for this kind of heavier weight 4 yarn. And because the first yarn was so stretchy, it actually ended up at 55, 60 rows being 13.5 inches wide, which stretched to fit a 22-inch head. But the gray yarn doesn't stretch anywhere close to that. So I ended up with 18 inches wide to stretch around a 22-inch head, and so that was about 54 rows. So again, close in the number of rows, but very different in the overall width. So what am I expecting now for this different heavy 6-weight yarn? Well, this yarn is 6 bulky, but it's kind of fluffy, so it's not very dense. And again, my gauge was 10 stitches, 12 rows. So that's giving me 2.5 per inch on a stitch per inch, which again, if I'm doing basic math, would be, I don't know, 28 stitches roughly. And again, half double crochet, slip stitch, back loop only, to get me that 11-inch height. And if I was roughly guessing 18 inches wide, again, I'm getting somewhere around that 50 kind of row estimate. But again, that width is very much based on, do I have stretchy yarn and the rib stitch? So what actually happened? Well, let's walk through how I kind of worked through this project. The first thing that I'll show you as we kind of look at the pictures that I took along the way, because it's often, you know, a small project, I would say you could probably do this wheat sheet half in, well, let's say 1 airport kind of wait and short flight. So, you know, maybe 2 hours tops. I ended up discovering that if I chained the 28, I was only around 9 inches. So the theory of it being 11 inches totally didn't hold up. Even when I stretched that chain out, I definitely couldn't get 11 inches with 28. So I actually can say I chained 32 to end up with a result that was sort of 11 inches for the height. And again, a rough guess about 50 rows. Well, this yarn is stretchier than the gray, and so I ended up with about 44 rows. So again, as we walk through this hat, I did some changes, and I have other videos on this wheat sheaf, but I did again have a much bulkier yarn than any of the other previous videos I've done. So I did need to chain more than expected. I did confirm that gave me the 11 inches. Then I started with the repeat for changing this up to have a wheat sheaf. And my tip is always on these hats, if you want to do different stitches, to do 10 of the half double crochet slip stitch back loop only for the brim. So again, if I had, 32 stitches here, my first 10 stitches are in the rib for the brim. Then you can really change up any number of stitches to the body of the hat. So the next 20 stitches for me are this wheat sheaf pattern. And I'll put a link to the Briana K instruction video underneath in the comments if you're interested in this one. And then I had 2 stitches at the top to again just make a nice finish at the top of the square. So that's my repeat. It's a 4-row repeat of 2 rows and 2 puff rows. You can see by the time I've done 3 puff repeats, the puff stitch is dramatically wider than the half double crochet stitches. So does this cause a problem? And my answer is no. So again, you can vary up the stitches for the body of the hat. If you end up with this jig jog that I do here in the picture, simply run a short row. So just do the first 10 rib stitches up and down, making a short row, and then continue on to continue the full rows in the next instant. And you're going to see in the next photo, you really don't notice these short rows at all. Like if you were a crocheter, you could probably pick it out if I gave you a few minutes. But to the majority of people that you're crocheting for, these short rows just disappear and you don't notice them in the hat. For a size medium, I just sort of wait till I see a big enough jig jog to do it. And in my experience, I end up with 2 over, again, an 18-inch medium hat. So, if you have a large, you might need a 3rd one in, but I find 2 usually is enough to correct the jig jog, and I end up with a perfect rectangle at the end of the project by just adding those short rows in to adjust for any variances you have between your rib stitch and whatever glorious pattern that you're using for the body of the hat. So again, that was 10 stitches in rib, 20 stitches in wheat sheaf, and then 2 stitches at the top, which again, I don't correct the spacing there because you're going to kind of rope that top section in anyways to close off the top of the hat. So If there is a slight jig jog on those last two stitches, I don't think it actually ever matters because you're kind of, again, rolling that in. So on this one, I did end up with 18 inches fits a 22-inch head. Again, I was just double checking. I then just slip stitch up the two sides. I loop the yarn around the top to do a drawstring, kind of pull close. And again, you turn up the brim and you get a very great, wearable hat. Nice stretchy brim. I fold this up over the wheat kind of pattern so you get a nice contrast between the brim and the wheat sheaf, and hopefully she loves this hat because this is specifically what she asked for. Now, I also know, based on making lots of other hats that they wear, that they like a pom-pom, so we put an optional pom-pom in. These ones I use are easily available at Amazon, many other online places, and I do just have a clothes hook that closes them on the inside, a little piece of wood that you attach them to, so they pop on and off to make washing really easy. And that's great if you're donating hats as well. Just makes them kind of very durable and kind of easy to wear. And if you get bored of the pom-pom or want to change it up, it's an easy change to the hat as well. So that was how I went from a 4 yarn to a 6 yarn. Let's talk about the matching mittens, and I used a pattern for those and how I also had to adapt that from a 4 yarn to a 6 yarn to make it work. So again, all my notes on Ravelry, but before I flip to the Mitt pattern, again, the larger weight yarn for the hat was chaining 32, got me 11 inches for the height. I did the 4-row repeat of the rib, half double crochet, slip stitch, back loop only, and the wheat puffs, and I kind of made the different brim by using the rib stitch for the brim, so always doing 10 stitches for the brim. The main body of the hat, which was 20 stitches, gave me 9 puffs, and then the last 2 stitches at the top of the hat that we're going to draw in was just again back to the rib stitch. So I added 2 rows in of those short rows to kind of make the patterns match up because the wheat sheaf is a bigger stitch, and I ended up with 11 repeats. And to again fit a 22-inch head, I had an 18-inch by 11-inch square for the hat. So now for these matching mittens. The wheat sheaf stitch I indicated was inspired by Briana. She has a huge range of patterns in it, and she came out with an interesting mitten pattern that is worked flat. And it so went well with the hat that I decided to do it straight from her pattern. Now my gauge with this, again, 6 yarn instead of the 4 for her pattern, was 15 stitches, 15 rows, and that's because she uses a single crochet back loop only, not the half double crochet that I use for the hats. So again, her rib stitching is going to create the cuff for the mitten, and the wheat sheaf is going to create the body and the fingers for the mitten. And again, it's worked in the flat. So in looking at the gauge difference between her biggest 4-weight yarn and my 6-weight yarn, I thought I might have a slight issue on the length, but I know the person that I'm crocheting this for doesn't want a tight fitted mitten, so that might not be a problem, but I definitely am looking at the pattern thinking I'm going to cut about 10, maybe 4 to 8 rows out of this pattern just at a quick glance. So width is definitely going to be the issue because when I look at her pattern, her mittens are ending up sort of 9 inches across or 4.5 inches for each side. And that is kind of matching my hand shape. So I know I can use my hand as a measure as I kind of work through her pattern. Again, a very easy, quick pattern to work up. You start with one thumb, you work across the main body, and you're doing both the front and back of the mitten at the same time. You finish with the second part of the thumb and then literally fold it in half, seam around the edge to kind of close up the mitten, and you get a great mitten that again you can kind of leave the cuff unrolled and tuck it up under a jacket if you're playing in the snow, or it matched the hat beautifully with a folded cuff. I thought made a kind of perfect mitten that looks like it's part of this set. So I had made the hats before, but never tried the mittens. And I do recommend her pattern. It worked out great. I thought it looked terrific as part of the hat mitten set. And again, super quick to work these up. You could definitely do the entire set in no time at all. So for me, the big change, and again, I'll put the links to the pattern, is she had 24 rows in the main body, and I definitely had to cut it down to 20. I would say if you wanted a more fitted mitten, you're cutting it down farther than that. So, 20 is sort of still very giving. And again, I was making the adult size, which she has 6 different sizes on the pattern site, but the adult is starting with a chain 40 plus 1. So that, just to again reference to make sure you're using the correct pattern, I'll put links below. So I ended up, I think, with what is going to be a lovely birthday gift. Again, this was a custom order. Someone had picked out the yarn and was very specific about wanting the wheat sheaf. But I think this is going to make a great Christmas gift or a great charity basket addition or even something for charity sales. So look forward to your feedback. And as always, we appreciate your subscriptions, likes, and do follow us.